Good afternoon, everyone. This is Christendom Strategist, and as you're no doubt aware by now, on September 10th, the massively influential conservative Charlie Kirk was assassinated. It's pretty much dominated the news cycle for the past week, and for good reason. Now, there have been a variety of reactions to this tragedy, and make no mistake, it is a tragedy despite how certain individuals, particularly on the political left, have reacted to it. Now, the reactions have ranged from people on the right saying that this is an all-out war, that Charlie Kirk was a moderate, and that the left has no idea what's coming, to people on the left, certain radicals, truly vile, despicable, reprehensible individuals, celebrating openly and publicly with their names and everything. Not even trying to pretend to be anonymous, openly celebrating the death of an individual because of his political opinions. And then, of course, there are those in between, and it is that in between that I want to focus on today. Now, in particular, I want to highlight the moderate left-wing position on this situation. And in doing so, I am going to demonstrate two things. Number one, that even the moderate left-wing position is manifestly immoral and should be resisted by all people with good conscience. And number two, how this moderate position demonstrates the total disdain and hatred that the left has for religion, in particular the Christian religion, and I'm going to explain why that is the case in both instances. So I'm going to illustrate the moderate left-wing position via an anecdote. I'm going to share an anecdote, and I hope by the end of it, it's made clear and it's made obvious why I chose to do it in that way. So I'm in college, as some of you may know, and because I'm a political science major, current events are often brought up, at least in passing, in these classes. I mean, it's political science, so that's going to happen. But anyway, I was in class on Friday, and the professor was having us discuss the Kirk assassination. And I distinctly recall a girl that I don't know what her name is, and if I did, I wouldn't reveal it. But I distinctly recall her saying something to the effect of, I, as a woman, struggle to have sympathy for Charlie Kirk because of his positions on things like abortion and birth control. And I think that a lot of people are not celebrating necessarily the fact that he died, but the fact that he no longer gets to spread the, quote, hate that he allegedly spread. Now, setting aside that I don't recall Charlie ever making any kind of comment on birth control, he may have, but then again, I wasn't a huge fan of the guy. I mean, I had no problem with him, but I didn't, watch him all the time or anything. But again, setting that aside, and also setting aside the fact that it is ridiculous to call his positions on really anything hateful, if we were to take this statement as a statement that accurately represents the sort of normie left-wing position, and I think it is fair to say that it does, because this is coming from an average college girl. I mean, how much more normal are you going to get than that? I mean, it's unfortunate that this is the norm, but it is what it is. So for the sake of argument, let's grant that this is the normal position among left-wingers, because by all accounts it seems to be. I know some people are going to dispute that, but again, for the sake of argument, let's just grant this position. If this is the normal, moderate position, then It's very telling for a couple reasons. Number one, because the quote moderate position is still incredibly immoral. Even if you're not going as far as to cheer on his death, the fact is that this was a man who had a wife and children, who had to unfortunately watch him get shot, and now there is a family who is left without a father. Now there is a woman who has to raise children basically by herself and has to rely on the generous donations of other people. So to say that you have no sympathy for this individual because he had political disagreements with you is insane. And if this is your state that you're in, and this is your thought process and mentality, then I don't have very much to say to you, except to tell you that your conscience is incredibly seared, and I pray for you to have an illumination of conscience, because obviously you need it. But that's the first reason, that it's incredibly immoral and indicative of a seared conscience. That was my first point that I made in the beginning. But the second reason it's telling is a lot more interesting. I mentioned in the beginning that this line of reasoning demonstrates that the left has nothing but hatred and contempt for religion. I'm going to explain how and why that is. So the why is very simple. The reason that it demonstrates this is because many, if not all, of Charlie Kirk's positions were primarily shaped by his Christian faith. There is not a single position that Charlie Kirk held that wasn't measured up to his faith in some form or fashion. That can be demonstrated in his pro-life position. Many of his pro-life arguments were Christian in nature. This girl specifically mentioned that his position on abortion was an example of the quote hate that he caused. Now, if the position that he espouses in regards to abortion is hateful, I'm going to grant that for the sake of argument, then it would follow then the thing that informs and shapes that position is also hateful, which would mean that the Christian religion is hateful by this definition. And most progressives are going to tell you that this is exactly the case, that Christianity in and of itself is a hateful and oppressive religion. So it follows that if you want to dismantle things that are hateful and oppressive, you would at best feel indifferent or even ecstatic at the prospect of this religion being, well, for lack of a better term, wiped off the face of the earth. So if you have a man like Charlie Kirk who is openly preaching the Christian faith and saying that it should inform politics, and who explicitly has it inform his politics, then you are obviously going to have a lack of sympathy and empathy for that individual if you believe that the thing that informs his politics is also hateful. And unfortunately, that lack of sympathy and empathy is going to remain in place even if something as heinous as him getting shot in front of his wife and children were to happen to him, because you believe that his views are so reprehensible and so repulsive that you just can't bring yourself to feel any kind of sympathy for him. Now, I understand that this is obviously a ghoulish and disgusting position. I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment, but we have to understand the mentality of these people and why they think that way. We also have to understand that this is the moderate position. This is by no means the radical position, which goes even farther than this. But how does it get to this point? The how is a little bit more difficult to explain, so I'm going to try to do it the best that I can. Essentially, it boils down to this. Any moral framework that maintains a significant degree of influence over society, over its laws, over its culture, over the socio-political dynamics of a society, is going to be naturally hostile to any other moral framework gaining a foothold in said society. And if it were to be the case that another moral framework is already dominant over society, already exercises the amount of influence that you would like to see your framework exercise over the society, then your task is to make sure that you destroy that influence. So in the case of progressivism and Christianity, Christianity was the moral framework that held society together for a very long time. Now it's progressivism, because progressivism has succeeded in basically displacing Christianity, and that is due to a number of factors that we don't have time to get into right now. But keep these ideas in mind, and especially keep in mind what I said about what happens when a dominant framework, progressivism in this case, is challenged by another framework, Christianity in that case, such that the challenger gained a foothold in society. Because we are currently in a moment where that moral framework, Christianity, that we thought we had banished a couple decades ago, is actually starting to make a resurgence, particularly among younger people. So, what do you do as a progressive when you see this, when you see the resurgence of Christianity, when you see that there are prominent voices calling for it to be the dominant moral framework of society once again, and they are also calling for your moral framework to be ousted because they see it as evil. I am one of those people, by the way. I do see progressivism as evil because, again, like I said, moral frameworks sharing a society are naturally hostile to each other, especially when those frameworks make opposing and competing claims to begin with. So what do you do as a progressive when you see a situation where a rival framework that you despise is getting a foothold? Well, you do your best to fight on your side of the culture war that inevitably develops as a result of this conflict. And part of that fighting, part of the tactics that you are going to use, is to demonize your opposition. And this, up to this point, is completely normal. This is the natural progression of events when you expect to have competing moral frameworks operating in the same society. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. The reason it's so unique and perhaps so egregious, I mean, it's definitely egregious, but the reason it's particularly egregious with the progressives is because they don't have a mechanism built into their moral framework that calls for compassion, mercy, and empathy towards their enemies like Christianity does. They do not have such a commandment, for lack of a better word. And they feel justified in going to, or reaching to, rather, any means to neutralize the opposition. And that is why you see so much political violence coming from radical progressives. Because when you get radicalized into an ideology that does not permit you to have mercy, compassion, or even empathy for your opposition without you being painted as some kind of traitor to your cause, then obviously that is going to happen. Don't be surprised when people take it as far as they do. I mean, you can see this as a practical example, because I know I'm talking kind of abstractly, but you can see this in how much the right in America is labeled as fascist, as Hitler-esque, and all manner of other terms that these people throw out that they don't understand. There's a reason why they do it. It's because they have to demonize their opposition, conflate them with the worst, most universally reviled groups imaginable, so that they can feel justified in attacking them. And that is why we get situations like the Charlie Kirk assassination. That is why they can assassinate such moderate voices as Charlie Kirk, because to them it makes no difference whether you're somebody who believes in open debate or not. It makes no difference what side of the right you are on. It doesn't matter whether you're a center right winger or a far right winger. It's all the same to them. They view your ideology, your framework, as inherently evil, and a framework, ideology that needs to be stopped at all costs. Now, at this point, you may object that this might be true of the radicals, but not necessarily of the moderates. And I would push back on that by saying that radicalization, in this case, is only really measured by how much you're willing to do. The most radical left-wingers are willing to commit this kind of violence, but the moderates are by no means exempt from. When you have such radically opposing ideologies as Christianity and progressivism in the same society, you cannot expect them to coexist. One is eventually going to triumph over the other. For decades, it was progressivism that triumphed over Christianity, but now we're kind of seeing a reversal of that, and this eventually is going to end in total triumph for one side, and I pray to God that it is my own, demonizing their opposition to some degree, which is why you can have even the most normal left-leaning people claiming that Charlie Kirk spread hate. It's because this is a symptom of the natural conflict of ideologies that we would do well to acknowledge instead of pretending like some of these things can just be talked through when they unfortunately cannot. When you have such radically opposing ideologies as Christianity and progressivism in the same society, you cannot expect them to coexist. One is eventually going to triumph over the other. For decades, it was progressivism that triumphed over Christianity, but now we're kind of seeing a reversal of that, and this eventually is going to end in total triumph for one side, and I pray to God that it is my own. Now, at this point, I'm anticipating a second objection, which would go something like this. I am a progressive, and I have no problem with Christianity so long as it stays out of the public square. While I appreciate this position and the people who hold it a lot more than those who are open about their anti-Christianity, I nevertheless have to point out that this does not disprove my argument. In fact, it actually proves it, because that caveat that you don't hate it as long as it stays out of the public square necessitates that if it were to try to exercise some degree of influence over the public square, then you would oppose it. You can see how this would lead you down the rabbit hole to radical anti-Christianity, which, if you keep going down that rabbit hole, would lead you to anti-Christian violence, or at least, if you're, again, a more moderate, normal person, you would say, well, I don't really care that much because I see Christianity as hateful, and this is somebody who is trying to push it in the public square, and I have a problem with that. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate that this moderate position is immoral, and it's not just immoral in my view. It's not just immoral in the view of those who share my ethical framework, but it's immoral in the view of many others who do not. That is why the right, from the centrist to the far right, from the secular to the religious right, has united around this issue. Because not only does the quote moderate position demonstrate a contempt for religion, since many religions, especially those that have absolute commandments such as Christianity and Islam and others, actively conflict with progressivism. It also shows that the left has pushed so far that the moderate position is now to demonize anything slightly to the right of it by equating it to the most reviled ideology in human history, and then using that as a justification to target people who are slightly to the right of it. And you can see why that creates a problem. You can see why people on both sides of the aisle are increasingly feeling like it is not possible to coexist with the other side. And that is a thesis that I do accept. I do not think that it is possible for these diametrically opposed ideologies to coexist in the same society for much longer. Now, I would explain why I think that is, but I think that this video is already kind of lengthy, and I also think that it would be slightly off topic and divert from the points I've already made in this video, so I am going to save those insights for another time. And this is the part of the video where I would ask for subscriptions and engagement with the video and the ideas that it presented. But given the topic today, I don't think that would be in good taste. So instead, I ask you to just say a prayer for Charlie Kirk's soul and the financial, emotional, physical well-being of his family. And I will see you guys in the next one. God bless.